And now I want to bring in a guest, Joseph Lowe. He's live in Los Angeles. He's actually a criminal defense, civil litigation, and military trial lawyer, and he's going to weigh in on some of what we're hearing as well. Thanks so much for being with us here.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Well, let's start with what we heard earlier, the debate on whether or not the prosecution can call a forensic psychiatrist to testify about George Floyd's behavior before his death. Many people upset, saying, why are they calling this into question? What are your thoughts on this?
That's an unusual move by the government. They don't usually like to get into that unless they have a case where you have an intent question. That means whether the person could have formed the intent to cause the crime they're being charged with. Usually you see that when there's something along the lines of the defense saying that they were insane and therefore he couldn't have done it. To put it in this case, it's unusual. However, I believe that the reason they're doing it is because they do want to show the jury that he was not doing anything that warranted the kind of treatment and clearly the result that he got from that officer. Because the officer was going to try and justify why he did that. Now, here's how they know this. Most of the time, the prosecutors in this case are constantly defending this police officer or ones like this from these type of charges or accusations from the other side. And so they usually are the ones having the police officer get up and say, oh, the reason I had to do this and use this tactic is because I was afraid. They love that word saying, I'm afraid, because then they think it justifies everything they do afterwards. And to a lot of jurors, it does. So the prosecutors are probably anticipating that and they're trying to put a strike out there or a wall or a block to that type of explanation by the defense.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, we all saw that video. That officer didn't look afraid, nor did any of the officers around him. And we know that, of course, as people of color, we want to see ourselves reflected in these jurors to make sure that there is justice. This is something that's, been talked about, in many cases, not just this one. This one is so high profile. So let's talk about these jurors that have been selected. What are your thoughts on the diversity of these jurors?
Well, I think the diversity is pretty good. And I've tried cases literally all over the world and certainly all over this country. And I'm here to tell you that most of the time I'm looking at jurors, I'm like, this cannot be the peer group that represents this area, but it is. And sometimes even almost feel that it's systematically through the DMV, which is how they select jurors usually, making a filter system so that I don't get a good cross section of the entire population. So I've been suspicious of that. However, in this case, I think they're doing a pretty good job with that. However, we have got to be really careful not to stereotype. I'm asked to lecture all over the country and the world on how I pick juries and the success I've had doing it and the techniques that I use. And the one thing that I teach lawyers, both brand new ones and ones with many, many years, some more than me, is you cannot stereotype. That is the same as you being ignorant and thinking that all I have to do is look at the skin color, the age, the gender, the work experience, and I can figure the person out. And I'm here to tell you, if they do that, either on the government side or on the defense side, they're gonna be really upset with the result from that. So to answer your question, lastly, how do I feel about the folks that are in that jury? And I believe what you're really getting is a good section of people who are well educated. I don't mean through universities necessarily, but through life. They have been exposed to a lot of differences among races, circumstances, socioeconomic climates, and they get it. And they're also level headed. So they're smart enough to realize that they're not going to say ridiculous things that are going to allow them to get bounced off the jury really, really fast. However, I do have a bit of a criticism of
All
some
right.
lawyers there that they are not asking good enough questions and not getting enough detail.
From which side? Which side is not asking good enough question?
Okay, I have to admit, I'm objecting to the way the government's doing the prosecutors. They're doing it the way they usually do it, and it's honestly that's why I do so well because they're terrible at it. But in this case, the defense is equally bad. The questions they're asking are not probative of how they feel, their biases, their conduct in any way. They're stereotyping. Lastly, what I'll say is to have the defense lawyer make the statement to the jury and those to listen that this is not about race is, in my opinion, ridiculous. And here's why. That is his opinion. That is his belief. That may be his experience from working on the case. But the problem he is missing and can't solve is this case is about perception, not his. Those who are going to be put in the box as jurors. He ought to be asking them, how do they see this case and do they think it's about race? And if they say yes or no, why? Stop giving speeches. People don't like being told what to think. Ask them how they feel and ask them why they feel that way. And now you're really going to start to learn some things.
Very, very interesting, very clever. We appreciate that insight. You're so right. You cannot stereotype people. We're out of time, but we appreciate all of your insights. Joseph Lowe, criminal trial attorney. Thanks for joining us from Los Angeles.